So welcome to the Bachelor of Social Science, the program for students interested in creating social change. Hi, I'm Rebecca Olsen, and I'm the program director and your host for today's webinar. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet today. On behalf of UQ's School of Social Science and the Faculty of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, I pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We recognize their valuable contributions to Australia and global society. So today, we've got a very full program. We'll start off after the introductions I've just given. I'll pass it over to Dr. Lynda Shevellar, who is a senior lecturer in the School of Social Science who teaches into the Bachelor of Social Science. Then Lynda will pass it over to Professor Paul Henman to introduce the Environment and Society major. I'll talk about the Health and Social Policy major. And the Bachelor of Social Science more broadly, before we pass it over to two graduates from the Bachelor of Social Science to talk about their career pathways after graduating. So first, we'll hear from Nina Koyevich and then Chris Hayward. You'll see that Q&A is listed here at the end. So please do use the Q&A function to type in any questions that you want to ask us, and we'll look at those at the end of the webinar and look forward to having a bit of a chat then. So to start off with, we've got a quick poll to hear from you and learn a bit more about why you're here today, what you're hoping to learn from today's webinar. So are you hoping to hear about what you can study through the Bachelor of Social Science? Are you wanting to find out about what jobs you can get? Do you want to hear from social science graduates or hear from UQ academics? Which do you want to learn about most? So please do choose an answer. All right, so most are interested in hearing about what you can study. Great, because that is what we'll be talking about first. So I'll pass it over now to Dr. Lynda Shevellar, and she's going to tell you about the development major.
So hi everyone, my name's Lynda and I teach in the development major within the Bachelor of Social Science, and I teach in a particular area called community development. And whenever I think of how I explain this to people, this image comes up in my mind because I'm sure this is how my parents understand what I do. And I guess what I wanted to do was talk about development in a broader sense, because often we have this vision of it's all about well-meaning goody two-shoes sitting by a fire singing Kumbaya. And whilst I don't discount that might actually be happening, it's actually a lot more interesting than that. So what I actually do in my career is spend a lot of time working with people who are in positions of vulnerability, trying to assist them to connect with their communities and working with the communities around them to ensure that their communities are receptive and inclusive. So I work a lot in disability and mental health, but I've also worked in spaces like disaster management and credit reform. So in the development major, a lot of our attention is spent on how we can respond to social injustice, how we can analyse the social impacts of development, and how to do things like evaluate aid and community development projects, and to develop some of those basic skills as we explore those areas. So to help explain what that looks like in practice, I thought I'd share one example from my career, and it's one that I think is particularly interesting because it's about disaster-driven food shortages. So You know, we've all just been through the whole COVID pandemic, and we've seen what happens around panic buying of toilet paper. So straight up close, we know what happens when resources get scarce and how quickly the shelves can be stripped. And we're actually entering a weather system. In fact, we can see it today, called the El Niño effect, which the last of which we saw was 10 years ago. And some of you might recall in 2010, 2011, 2012, we were subject to some pretty amazing weather here in Queensland. That's the weather system we're entering again. And one of the things that happened during that phase that is really unusual in an everyday Queensland town is that they ran out of food. And so the question was posed, how are we going to solve this problem? And the answers in development are incredibly broad. And as a development officer, you need to think about where it is you're going to put your priorities. Do you need to develop resources? Do you need to develop skills of local people to grow food? Do you need to work on the social networks between people? Or maybe it's about cultural development, Indigenous and alternative knowledges. Or maybe it's about skill development and us all becoming preppers in the basement. So you need to think about, well, what kinds of development are going to be most helpful? And in doing that work, we get pulled in multiple directions. And so part of the skill of being a development worker is being able to walk these continuums, knowing whether or not you want to work with resources inside a community or bring resources in from outside. Whether you're trying to work to some kind of objective standard set by health departments or WHO, or whether you're actually working with people's own subjective understanding of what development looks like in their lives. And whether we're trying to bring in services to meet the needs of people, or whether we're trying to grow local skills and knowledge. And disaster management is a really interesting side of development because it actually requires us to move across these continuums continually. The particular disaster that I'm thinking about it occurred in North Burnett in Queensland during 2011. Massive flooding on either side of a town that was essentially had a major highway going through it, and both sides of the road were cut. The bridges were absolutely washed away, and no food trucks could get through. At the same time, we had Cyclone Yasi happening in northern Queensland, which meant most of our military and aid equipment had been sent north. And there was very little opportunity to divert resources to helping this little local regional town. So the council in its wisdom turned to the community development workers that it employed and asked the question, how can we ensure this never happens again? Because whilst we think about food shortage as something that happens in the developing world, I think what made this really interesting was that this was a very, very regular rural town. There's nothing particularly outstanding about it, that had been very calm in its preparation up until this point and had never seen food shortages before. So what they did that I think was really interesting is, rather than simply bring in food packages or bring in experts, they looked to the local community and they asked the question, who did well? Who did well during the crisis? And they discovered there were three groups. The first group were elderly people, the second group were migrants, and the third group were the unemployed. So these were not the answers they were expecting. And then they had a look at what do all those people have in common? And they found, one, they're not big spenders. They buy cheap food that lasts a long time. Secondly, they're used to preparing things from scratch. So they know how to boil rice. They don't have rice that you stuff in a microwave. They know how to do things on a stovetop, which meant they didn't need power. They could do things in the backyard or over a kerosene stove. And the third thing is that they knew how to make things last a really long time. And any of you who are already students will know that you already have 300 recipes for 2-minute noodles. So it was that kind of thinking. And so what they did was they collated all that knowledge into a book called Recipes for Disaster. And they shared that to every single resident in the entire region. And they invited celebrity chefs on board so that they could then up the production value and get it a bit more broadly distributed. But the other thing that they did was also work with local shopkeepers to ensure that every single ingredient mentioned in these recipes was something that they could stock in the long term. So they're actually building the capacity of local people. And in the kind world of social science, we had the perfect test-retest condition when 2 years later the same town flooded again, but this time the food lasted. So in 2013 we had a series of storms and the town got flooded, but this time they had enough food. So I share that cute little example because often when we think about development, we think about aid distribution in other countries. in working in foreign lands, working in strange places. And in fact, some of the work we do can be very local and very humble and yet make a profound difference to people's lives. So what I would like to do now is, yes, this is where the celebration with guitars and drums might come in. What I want to do now is introduce you to our next academic. This is Professor Paul Henman from the School of Social Science, who teaches into the Bachelor of Social Science and does some really interesting work around social policy and digital information technologies. But I think you're talking about something else today, Paul.
Okay, well, thank you for everybody, Linda, for taking us through the development major. Our next topic is a poll. We're interested to know which of the major social challenges are the most important of our time. Is it climate change, affordable housing, health inequality, or political unrest? We'll give you a minute or two to select one of those. Climate change. Well, I guess that means that I've got the job of talking about climate change in the environment and society major. My name is Paul, as Linda said, and I've actually been involved in the Bachelor of Social Science since I started at UQ in 2004. It's a wonderful degree, so it's been around a long time, and there's lots of things that are beneficial from it, and Rebecca will come back to talking about that degree as a whole. But one of our new and exciting majors, now in its third year, is the Environment and Society major. And I was really pleased to be part of setting this major up and to see how the students have shown such an interest in that. So I guess the Environment and Society major begins with the question about, well, what are we doing with our environment? We can see that in the last 12 months, we've had drought, had bushfires, we've had rains and increasing tempos and cyclones that are going to happen this term. We've also seen within this whole discussion questions about species loss, such as the potential extinction of koalas in northern New South Wales. So what do we do into our environment, and how might we understand our relation to the environment? It's not, okay. So COVID-19, which we've all experienced in a very dramatic way this year, is just an example about how we as people are intrinsically part of and enmeshed in our environment. We are actually not separate to, but part of. There is debate and argument and scientific research that suggests that coronavirus 19, COVID-19, arises from bats and leads into transition into humans. Now, research from the University of Melbourne have said, don't blame the pangolin or bats for COVID-19, but rather animal viruses that spread into humans are a result of human problems and human causes. It's about the way in which we break into new environments, the way in which we intersect the animals and animal viruses into our human production and our resource and development. So there is the way in which we think about the environment and social sciences is helping us to see the very different ways in which the environment intersects with us. It's not just a scientific element to be studied. For example, the former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, stated that climate change is our greatest moral challenge of the 20th century. And yet in Australia, we've really struggled to try to gather together around that challenge. Why is that? So the Bachelor of Social Science, Environment and Society major helps us to bring an understanding of that. It helps us to bring and see how environmental challenges are a result of economic growth, infrastructure development. It's part of our leisure. and part of our politics. It sits within science and also is experienced differently from different people. An important element of the way in which we engage with the environment comes back to how we fundamentally think about the world. Going through the Bachelor of Social Science, Environmental and Society major, we might come across different ways and different cultural perspectives. From on the left-hand side, the Judeo-Christian Islamic traditions of God as a creator of the heavens and the earth, which gives dominion over the world. That can be interpreted in the middle picture as about the environment as a form of resource that we use as modern people to use as resource to do human development. We can even think about it as a resource for our spiritual reflections, our calming nature, attaching ourselves back into environment. But at the same time, it can also be as part of our cultural or our understanding of who we are from an Indigenous perspective, that ultimately who we are is grounded in the environment and we are part of that. We can't be ignored from that. And so our Indigenous peoples in Australia really tell us about the importance of our land, our interconnections, and the land becomes part of our body and our body belongs to the land. When we're studying the Bachelor of Social Science, it's very much from a social science perspective. It's not about environmental science. So it emphasises those things like social science, the studies of humans, but humans are not the only element that we study. Humans are part of the environment, not the object of our study. So we learned, and the major allows you to engage with this from multiple academic disciplinary perspectives. For example, from politics and policy, philosophy, sociology, anthropology, economics, cultural heritage and Indigenous knowledge. So all of these disciplinary ways of thinking helps to provide insights so that we can engage with how is it that we as humans engage with and respond to the environment. Oops. So where might a Bachelor of Social Science, Environment and Society major might lead you to? Well, it may lead us into working as environmental officers, not so much with the science expertise, but understanding the human side of our environment. It may be involved in helping environmental development, just as Lynda talked about development in an economic or social element. The environment is also part of that development process. So, for example, on the right-hand side, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals includes really important elements around our environment. You can also see yourselves working as a policy officer within government or within an advocacy community. For example, we have a Bachelor of Social Science third-year research project this year working with the Queensland Conservation Council, investigating how migrants to Australia understand climate change and whether their own historical experiences from their origin countries, how climate change is affecting their origin countries, how does it affect their own attitudes towards climate change in Australia? I want to end that discussion about the Environment and Society major by introducing Dr Rebecca Olsen, who is a senior lecturer in the School of Social Science and has been the Health and Social Policy major coordinator for some years. And she's a health sociologist who works a lot with health policy people and health practitioners. So over to you, Rebecca.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. So the Health and Society major, what we're now calling the Health and Social Policy major, introduces students to a really social understanding of health and medicine and allows students to develop skills in analyzing and developing social policy to address really pressing social inequalities in health and beyond health issues. So one thing we study in the health and social policy major is something called medicalization. So medicalization is the classification of more and more of everyday life as pathology in need of treatment. So it refers to this kind of tendency to understand life and dysfunctions that are arguably not of a kind of medical nature as psychological or biological diseases in need of a medical treatment and control. And ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactive disorder, provides a really prime example of medicalization. So several studies show that a diagnosis of ADHD, for example, is a lot more common in children who are the youngest in their year, the youngest in their class at school. So this raises important questions about the biomedical or the social nature of ADHD. So a lot of sociologists show how ADHD is something that was previously understood as undesirable behavior that has been reframed as a kind of neurochemical problem. So, but in saying that ADHD is an example of medicalization, it's really important to emphasize, I'm not saying that ADHD is not a real problem or that neurochemistry is irrelevant. What I am saying is that the way ADHD is understood, how it's been defined, and how it's being treated has changed a lot. It's changed substantially, raising really important questions about why. So one reason is validation. Redefining a condition as appropriate for medical attention legitimates it and reduces the stigma that's attached to it. A second reason, and a kind of more sinister reason, is profit. So medicalization is an excellent means by which to promote a kind of particular condition and by extension, the concordant therapy. So it's through information on kind of newly introduced prescription treatments on breakfast television, on websites, and even through commercials aired on TV in the US and in New Zealand that medicalized disorders make their way into the kind of diagnostic process. So I want to take a look at this Zoloft commercial as another possible example of medicalization. While you watch the clip, which is an example of direct-to-consumer advertising, which is legal in New Zealand and in the US, keep these questions in mind. So what problem is the ad addressing? What's the proposed solution? What assumptions underlie how the problem is presented? And what are the social implications?
You know that feeling of suddenly being very nervous? Maybe you're scared of being criticized, or imagine that others are judging you. You're embarrassed and don't know why. Your heart thumps and races, so you stay back. You worry that you're the only one who ever feels this way. Actually, you could be one of 16 million Americans with symptoms of social anxiety disorder. Zoloft, a prescription medicine, can help. It works to correct a chemical imbalance in the brain which may be related to symptoms of social anxiety disorder. In time, you could overcome those nervous, anxious moments. Only your doctor can diagnose social anxiety disorder. Zoloft is not for everyone. People taking MAOIs or Pimicide shouldn't take Zoloft. Side effects may include dry mouth, insomnia, sexual side effects, diarrhea, nausea, and sleepiness. Zoloft is not habit-forming. Talk to your doctor about Zoloft, the #1 prescribed brand of its kind. Zoloft. When you know more about what's wrong, you can help make it right.
So what did you think? I think it's gone just one too far. We'll ask you to take the poll in response to your critical engagement with the Zoloft ad. A social scientist would recognize the Zoloft ad as illustrating profit maximization, anxiety validation, medicalization, or all of the above. All of the above. Absolutely. It's both an example of medicalization, anxiety validation, and profit maximization in big pharmaceuticals. So this kind of mini lecture, this engagement with the Zoloft clip, illustrates the critical skills that are developed through a social science degree, preparing you with those tools to kind of think differently about the world around you so you can make it better. Through things like advocacy work, through work as a kind of healthcare liaison officer, or through policy development. So what I'll do next is summarize the Bachelor of Social Science now that we've explored these 3 different majors within the Bachelor of Social Science. So you can see on this slide a summary of those 3 majors. In the development major, you analyze the social effects of international and community development with an emphasis on alleviating poverty and inequality and developing sustainable societies. In the environment and society major, you explore the intersections between socio-political processes and environmental problems to address issues of climate change and waste. And in the health and social policy major, you investigate inequalities in health and illness while learning to develop, implement, and evaluate policy solutions to produce positive change. In the Bachelor of Social Science, students can take courses related to their specific major. So they take courses related to one of these 3 majors, and all students will need to kind of choose that major by the 2nd year, which gives you freedom in your 1st year to explore, try things out, see what fits best with you. And students will also need to take core courses in the social sciences. So this includes, like we heard from Paul, courses in sociology, political science, anthropology, and research methods. And one thing that I think you'll hear from Nina and Chris later on is just how central those research skills are, as well as those critical thinking skills that kind of go along with them in employability, in really showing employers what you can offer. Students also have freedom to take a range of electives outside of those in the core courses and in the major courses. So courses in the social science position students to gain those 21st century skills in critical thinking and in linking knowledge and research to provide insight and strong evidence for social change. Through industry partnerships and with a really strong kind of ethical barometer, this degree really guides you in what to do and how to do it in the process of social change making. One thing we've found is that year after year, a key reason why students are attracted to the Bachelor of Social Science is because of their interest in making the world a better place, in creating social change. And we've heard a lot about social sciences as well as other studies like Bachelor of Arts or Humanities over the past several months, as this has been a focus in the government. But I'll just pose this poll, which I think shows perhaps a bit of representation. So what do you think? How many members of the Australian Parliament have a Bachelor of Arts degree or a Bachelor of Social Science? Is it 7, 28, 53, or 69? Almost. It's 69%. So 46% of the 150 members of Parliament have a degree in the Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Social Science. And 6 of those 69 got their BAs at UQ. So for example, Australian Labor Party MP Patrick Gorham is in the House of Representatives, and he has a Bachelor of Social Science from Curtin. So government is one key way to create change using a Bachelor of Social Science degree. And a final note before I pass it over to Nina is that there is also an option to take both the Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Social Science. So this is a really popular choice. Students doing a double in BA and the Bachelor of Social Science. So it turns into 4 years instead of a 3-year degree. So over now to Nina. Nina Koyevich is a Senior Policy Officer in Aboriginal Health. Thanks, Nina, for telling us about your career journey.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and tell you about my career progression after my Bachelor of Social Science and Bachelor of Arts dual program. So I joined the program in 2012, straight out of high school. I was really interested in making a positive impact and looking at how we could improve the way that policy is developed. This was based on my own life experience of having lived in social housing and mixed with communities that had been disadvantaged. And I was looking at something that was practical and that I could move out and go into the workforce straight away. So once I graduated from my Bachelor of Social Science and Arts, I was thinking about how do I apply my skills and what's out there in the workforce for me. So I initially started working as a research assistant, which I think is quite a common role for new graduates, just learning about how to apply those research skills straight away. And I also had an opportunity identified with one of my professors to do a honours program that was directly with an Aboriginal community based in northern New South Wales. I was really excited about the opportunity to apply that cultural awareness and looking at applying Indigenous knowledge straight into practice through a policy lens. And so I went straight into the honours program from there while I was working part-time. So from there, I then went on to working as a junior anthropologist, which was really exciting. In my Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Social Science, I did the health and social policy major in the social science component and the anthropology major in my Bachelor of Arts. So working as an anthropologist was really a dream role for me kind of coming out of university, and I was excited about applying those analytical skills straight away. I also took the common route of going through an Aurora Internship as a new graduate. It's a very popular option for Bachelor of Social Science graduates, as you can get placements with organisations that are really needing your skills straight away. From that internship, I was really fortunate to be placed with First Nations Legal and Research Services in Melbourne, and that turned into a full-time position with a sister organisation soon after. Since then, I've worked over a couple of years in these different roles, and after working with in the research and policy role for a while, I was thinking about diversifying my skills. Is there something else that I could learn from going into a different non-policy role? So that led me to becoming a project officer, more focusing on project management. But then since then, I knew that policy was where I could make the most impact and felt like I could apply my skills in the best way. And so that's brought me back to working with the Victorian Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, where I currently am. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the skills that I use in both of those roles that I've recently held. So with the top one there, the Voucher Policy Officer, this is a really varied role, and I find it really exciting because of that. I get to prepare policy briefs and review policy materials, draft proposals, and consult with the community, which I find really rewarding. In terms of applying those skills from the Bachelor of Social Science, I think the top skills that I apply daily, analytical thinking and reflecting and evaluating on policy options. So I'm constantly making links with research and applying it in practice, and also drafting materials that need to be shared with busy ministers and staff in the public service through to our community members in our member organisations. So it's a varied audience for all of our materials. Back in the project officer position that I previously held, it was a bit different. I was looking more at project managing programs that worked with the Aboriginal community in the children and family space, and also writing funding submissions for new grants. I found this role exciting because I got to use some different skills around creative thinking. I could look at different options for how to work with staff members across the organisation to find out where were the gaps and where could we address community issues in a better way. I would constantly be looking at, how do we deal with issues that came up in implementation of programs and projects, and identifying alternatives for what we might be able to proceed with to create the best impact. I've also been consulting across staff in the organisation and members of the community to look at what are the different diverse perspectives around what they want out of these programs and how can we embed that in the funding submissions as well. There's a brief overview about some skills that I'm applying right now that I learnt during my degree, but we can also look at asking you guys what you think about what the top 21st century skill is that you gain from the Bachelor of Social Science. So, is this critical thinking, problem solving, communication, or creativity? Yeah, nice one. So I also think that critical thinking is the top skill that I've applied from my Bachelor of Social Science in practice since I've graduated, but all of them have been really useful to creating a well-rounded, employable new graduate who can go into multiple different roles. I'm now just going to talk a little bit more about other 21st century skills and how they apply to new graduates. I'll just close this 1 second. So I created this visual just to give you an example of different 21st century skills that are being discussed at the moment with Year 12 curriculum and getting our leaders ready for the next stages. So I wanted to look at, there's a huge range of 21st century skills that are fostered through the curriculum in the Bachelor of Social Science. I've weighted them in darker purple towards the ones that I think are more closely related. But beyond these skills, which I think are really valuable, I would also like to mention that the Bachelor of Social Science also invites you to think creatively about how to apply your skills in the workforce, thinking about technology in new ways and how to innovate in the community space, and can be easily tailored to your passions and interests. So thanks very much. And I would like to now pass over so you can hear from the experience of Chris. So Chris is a design anthropologist currently working in the architecture space. So over to you, Chris.
Cool, thanks, Nina. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for coming along. I graduated quite a while ago from the Bachelor of Social Science Honours, and I currently have a Masters of Design Anthropology. So what I wanted to just quickly touch on this afternoon is some of the very contemporary ways in which anthropology is being applied in industry. So when I first started my career post UQ, I did some work at UQ around the community use of information technology. So one of the things, this was back when we went from dial-up to broadband, and we're looking at all of the different ways in which information communication technologies can actually be applied around health, wellness, commercial opportunities, and in a lot of different ways. But you can see through my career here, I've done the things where I worked for the Australian government on the Spam Act, so doing research around, and you may not remember this, but we used to get a lot of spam email. And so we had to bring in legislation at the country level to manage that. There were big problems with spyware and surveillance software. So again, in government, a lot of my work was around the digital divide and looking at the social and cultural impacts of technology and whether we needed appropriate regulation and government legislation around that. But then I segued into my passion around healthcare, and I spent a lot of time working on the Australian personally controlled electronic health record, telehealth, online consultations in general practice, and very much looking at our relationship between technology and healthcare. So what is the relationship when you're sitting in the doctor's consulting room and you've got a GP and a computer and the patient? How does that actually work? How do we make sure these technologies work for the betterment of ourselves? Then I did a Masters of Design Anthropology, and I shifted into very much a commercial space. So I used to work for the global design firm called Fjord. So we would design electronic products and services for government, for industry. So when you're using your apps on your phone, we used to design a lot of apps. We used to do work for Google, pharma companies, literally creating the tools that we use every single day of our life to get around cities, interact with companies. We used to build a lot of software for banks. So the things like the Commonwealth Bank app, we were part of the team that actually designed some of those things. So some of the products you're actually using out there in the world today need anthropological and social science understanding to make sure that they work in the right way. So right now, I do some of my own consulting work, but I pretty much work with IT engineers, government, big companies, small companies, community development groups, and actually think about how do we change our relationships to spaces and places and technology and bring those together. So a couple of the quick things that I've done at the moment is designing a new basketball arena in Tokyo. We're working on the design of a massive regeneration in central Bangkok, but also looking at how do we invigorate our high streets in COVID. How do we bring people back to the high streets and reinvigorate our communities? So if we go to the next slide, just a couple of quick things I want to touch on. So I'm very fortunate that I get employed as an anthropologist in design to bring about change in the world. But a lot of my jobs have not been anthropology jobs, but I've applied how I think about the world in that way, in that job. So even if you're saying, I don't want to be an anthropologist, I want to work in policy or I want to work in community engagement, what you will learn through this degree is how to see the world from somebody else's perspective. Really useful ways of exploring different ways of understanding all the multiple truths in the world. Looking out for who's excluded, who's included, and how does a decision that somebody is going to make going to impact on the environment, on wellness, on a whole range of different things. And so really importantly, a lot of the skills that you learn in your degree, critical thinking, communication, analysis, how to actually design a proper research project and have people trust in the results. These are all really, really important skills because at the end of the day, when you're talking to government or a business and whether it's an entry-level job and all throughout your career, these are the things that you will do every single day of your life to bring about change in the world. And a social science degree gives you a really unique perspective on what matters in the world and why you should take notice of some of the things that other people think don't matter. So that's my quick spiel to you. I think you've got an amazing opportunity at the moment to really think about where you want to go in the world. There are anthropologists in big companies, Google, Facebook, Intel, IBM. You can end up working in the most amazing places and companies in the world. And over to Q&A.
Great. So we've already got several questions in the Q&A window. The first is, how do you communicate the skills that you learn in social science on your resume and to future employers? Chris, can I give this one to you?
Sure. Okay, so I was talking about this with the honours students today, and your job is to figure out what you've learned and turn that into the language and ideas of your employer. So when I'm talking to architects, there's no point me talking to architects, you should hire me because I'm a really good researcher about social inclusion and exclusion. They have no clue what that means. So what I have to do is use their language to talk about what we've learned. So for example, when I'm talking to the architects around how do we make sure that everybody can come and use this arena, I talk to them around thinking about extreme users. I talk about people who have different disabilities. So again, it's really interesting to think about how do we turn the language of social science into the language of the business or the employer that I'm talking to.
Thanks, Chris. So we've got another question here. If there's time, I'll come back and ask Nina. the same question to see how you approach that same craft of casting your resume to be attractive to future employers. So second, what are the key differences between sociology and social science? Lynda, can I pass it over to you to answer this one?
Oh my goodness, you can, but you may have to augment my response. Well, for me, social science is a broader school into which sociology fits. Feel free to nod or disagree at this point, Rebecca. So I love the expression thinking sociologically, which is one of the things we talk about very early on in the degree, which is essentially how do you see the world differently through a sociological lens? So often we individualize problems. We say things like, well, the reason people are unemployed is because they're not motivated, or the reason you don't have a job is because you're lazy. Thinking sociologically means thinking about how do the various powers and structures in society create that dynamic so that it's not just about me being lazy. It's actually about whole economic systems and political systems and language systems that all come into play so that I can understand the problem in a much more complex way. That to me is sociology. Social science is the much bigger school into which that fits and includes things like anthropology that Chris was talking about. It might also include things like criminology, development, environmental studies. So I see it as the much broader and richer camp. Sociology is just one part of that, and I think, as both Nina and Chris have indicated, you can jump in and out of a whole range of different disciplines that will help build up your understanding of social science. And that's why you can end up with a whole range of social science graduates who actually have quite different skill sets and interests. How's that, Rebecca?
Perfect. And as you would have noted from some of the slides, I think in particular the slides that Paul presented about the environment and society major, all of the majors and the core within the Bachelor of Social Science engage with a range of disciplines. So there's a really strong foundation, not just in sociology, but also in anthropology, in politics, and in policy in particular. But there are opportunities to spread that diversity even further and really make the degree your own. So our third question, can you study online, and is this cheaper? I'll take this one. So at the moment, this is a bit of an unknown space. You can study online at the moment because of COVID-19 changes. We have a lot of courses. Most courses are in the flexible mode. And that means that there's a combination of face-to-face learning, often say tutorials, workshops, or other kinds of smaller interactions are face-to-face. But larger classes, like your big lectures, those are being videoed, and those recordings are being posted online with often options to interact in an online way, in a virtual way. In terms of cost, I don't think there's a difference in terms of cost, and I'm not sure how long the increased number of external options, that means online only options, will be available. It may just be next year that we see flexible and external mode continue. So it is a bit of an unknown space. But I think that's, somebody else maybe can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's the case pretty uniformly across Australia. We're seeing heightened options in terms of virtual engagement for 2020 and 2021. No difference in cost, but we are, yes, going to check back in this space later on. All right, we've got a fourth question. Who should we get in contact with for career advice for specific courses and where we would like to work in the future? So I'll take this one. Your major conveners will be a great source of information. So your major conveners, they are the people who kind of provide that oversight over that particular major, whether it's environment, health and policy, or whether it's development. And they can provide career advice that's tailored to students who are wondering, who am I? What do I want to do? What interests me? What relations matter to me? Where do I want to go? The major convener is a great option for continuing that dialogue as you progress through the Bachelor of Social Science. You can also ask me as the Bachelor of Social Science Program Director, and you can also come to a range of different events that we hold during the course of the degree to hear from people like Chris and Nina about their career trajectories, to learn from industry partners about particular options. So there's a great year-long project course that's really the shining gem within the culminating shining gem within the program that is the Bachelor of Social Science, where students engage as a team with a industry partner to work on a project and provide, in consultation with that partner, advice or research results that will help that industry partner in some way. So what I'd like to do now, we've just got one other question. If we're interested in working with or for the government, would we also need to have some kind of background in public health, or would our social science be sufficient? So Chris, can I pass that over to you, given the extensive focus? We have seen health in Nina's CV as well, but there's a lot on health within your CV. Can I ask you to address that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I graduated, so I was, I was probably late 20s when I actually graduated, and I actually joined a graduate program in the Commonwealth Government in the Department of Communications, IT and the Arts, as it was known then. And then I moved over to the Department of Health. So actually, your social science degree will get you into probably most government programs, to be honest, because one of the things that they love is the diversity of thinking. They don't, I have friends with law degrees who work in health and vice versa. So again, what government departments are looking for are diversity of perspectives. So if you want to go into healthcare, I had no background in health when I moved into health. I was interested in IT and I learned about healthcare. So again, your social science degree, in one sense, it's very broad, but that broadness is brilliant because it enables you to look at any industry, any topic with a particular lens. And that's really, really valuable.
And Lynda, did you want to extend on that?
Yeah, I guess I was just going to say that it's amazing how broad and the places that you can end up with this skill set. So I actually will echo Chris's comment. Graduate programs are amazing. That's how I started out. And I got my job. I had a background. My majors were in psychology and sociology and some weird dabbling in Russian, and I still don't know why. And I ended up working for the Australian Taxation Office, which is the last place I would have ever imagined. It was amazing. I worked as a cultural change officer. And after that, I ended up in family and community services. So the kind of places that you can land is extraordinary, because obviously people didn't employ me for my extraordinary financial skills. It was about my ability to research and analyse and understand the context of the workplace.
And I just want to add to that. I think one of the really interesting things that social science graduates bring is this idea of thinking more holistically. If you go to a lawyer, you're going to get a legal view. If you go to an accounting, you're going to get an accountant's view. Whereas what we're able to do is look at all of those views and go, here's actually a better understanding of the issue that you're thinking of. And so most of the topics, there are consequences for environment, there are consequences for politics in government. So again, your ability to look at a lot of different topics and synthesize them together to go, here's a perspective of how this is going to impact community, society, individuals is really, really important.
Great, thanks for that. Can I pass it over to Nina now? Nina, can I ask you to extend maybe on two of those questions? That last one, that's about your experience maybe with these graduate employment tracks, but then also going back to that question of how it is that you represent what you've learned, the skills you've developed through the Bachelor of Social Science on your CV.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Yeah, absolutely. So I ended up not going down the path of going through a graduate program myself. Just it was an option for me. So I was looking at graduate positions or just going straight into a community organisation as kind of two dominant options for a new policy grad. And I, at the time, was erring more towards working with community as I had kind of expanded on my skills around stakeholder engagement with the Aboriginal community and looking at diverse perspectives that I wanted to bring in to create change in the system rather than going into the system as in within government and making that change in there itself. So I've gone more through an advocacy path through my career progression. So working with community organisations advocating to government rather than working within government itself. However, I would say, in kind of combining those two questions in one, I would also say that by doing the Aurora Internship, I did get an opportunity to be placed in an organisation where I could learn a lot about stakeholders, and I was able to be mentored by more senior staff in those organisations to help me with they could identify skills that I didn't even know were really marketable at that time, but they were able to help me translate those and say, you're really good at doing this. This is a marketable skill that would be really valuable to our organisation. And we're able to feed that back to me, which was just a fantastic experience. And I think that's what internships can bring. It's someone who can reflect back to you, what are your strengths? What are you bringing in? And you can then take some notes and look at, okay, what was I able to create positive impact in, or what do I feel was my favourite parts of those internships and practical application, and then use those on your resume to say, you know, I've been engaged in these types of projects and I've done these things. And I would also say, building on the points from Lynda and Chris around that holistic perspective, I think one of these key skills that you can also translate is being able to map stakeholders and look at all the power dynamics and relationships around the projects and the workplaces that you're working in. I think that's something that's been very valuable to me in translating my skills between originally working in land rights and native title, then transitioning to community and family health, through to now working in applied, you know, a membership organisation which has community health sectors and GPs that we work with regularly. I also don't have that applied background in health, but I could market that I knew how to learn those skills really quickly, and I could understand all the stakeholders and what their needs were and how these things were operating in a system. So I think that's a really big, really beneficial part of the social sciences degree, which I know from talking to my peers as young graduates, they unfortunately didn't get through their career programs. It wasn't an emphasis. So I think that was a fantastic component.
We're almost out of time, but can I just ask in 3 words, Chris and Nina, what are your biggest achievements following graduation? What are you most proud of related to what you got from the Bachelor of Social Science?
Oh, tough on the spot. Nina, have you got something?
Yeah, what comes to mind straight away from me is I was able to just build on those career advice that I got from student services when I was a student to really put myself out there and to really market myself. And I was able to get involved with the treaty policy development in Victoria, which was incredible as a young grad to be working in policy development for land rights and recognition. So that was massive for me as a new grad.
I think for me it was how to view the world from somebody else's perspective in a really rigorous way. So not from an emotional way, but to have a really true appreciation on somebody else's or another group of people's way of life and why they do the things that they do in the way that they do them. And to be able to share that in a really respectful way with somebody else. And I think for me, that's what I do in my daily life, whether it's in industry or not. It's trying to help somebody understand, a decision maker understand a different group of people in a really rich, respectful way.
Thank you to all of our panelists. I think this has been a very informative webinar. Thank you to all of our attendees. It's been great fielding your questions, and I hope you learned something, and we hope to welcome you into the Bachelor of Social Science in 2021.